if you could go back and meet with a younger version of yourself at any age, what would that age be? What would be sort of happening in that moment? And what would you tell her?
I think 34 comes up because it's this really interesting time. You're no longer in your 20s, right? You're supposed to sort of have everything figured out, but we don't always. And, I was in a place then where I was like, I need to get married. I'm like getting so old. I was thinking about all these things. And I think that if I look back now, I would say, hey, you don't have a timeline. No one's got a timeline on you. This is all on your time, and it's going to be okay. You're going to figure it all out. It's going to be okay. You're going to be enough, right? Now, what do you really want? And, I would have said, like, find some of those close friends and stick with them. Don't worry about what everybody else says. Don't try to be the most popular girl in the room. Surround yourself with the right kind of people, because you definitely know in your gut who they are. And trust your gut. You don't have to do polls of everybody else out there to see, what everyone else thinks before you make a decision for yourself.
Love that. I love that. Hey there, welcome back to Flourish or Fold. This is Dr. Taryn Marie, and today our guest is Tamsen Fadal. She's an award-winning journalist, author, women's health advocate, podcast host, and digital content creator. She has over 2 million followers across her platforms, and she talks about what it means to live in a really beautiful way in midlife. You see, Tamsen was navigating her own menopause journey as a woman at age 50 in the workplace, and she realized the impact of menopause on her life and the untold stories of so many women. So she has dedicated her work to really telling the stories of women who are facing menopause and how we can live an incredibly beautiful midlife with information and awareness. Welcome back to Flourish or Fold, Stories of Resilience. We have an incredible guest today. I'm so excited you tuned in. We have Tamsen Fadal, who's a journalist, a women's health advocate, and an incredible digital content creator. If you have not yet checked out her Instagram, it is so much fun to listen to her interviews about how she dresses for the day, her beautiful closet, the wisdom and insight that she's bringing to women around romantic relationships, our relationships with one another. So I'm just so delighted and honored to have you with us today, Tamsen.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. And one of the things that you have been working on that's a big project that you're putting out into the world, and this falls under, you wear many hats, but this falls under the sort of hat of women's health advocate, is you actually have a film coming out this year, the M Factor film, which is going to debut on Women's Menopause Day on October 18th on PBS.
Yeah, I'm real excited about it. It's coming out. We've been working on it for several years now. I came from news where, you do a story and it airs that night. And this one has taken years to create and produce, but I'm so excited about it because we're sharing women's stories and it's so important. And we're also talking about women's healthcare and advocacy and how we shred the silence on it. So we're all talking about this and it doesn't have the stigma that it's had for so long. So I'm thrilled and thank you. Thank you for talking about it because it's exciting to me.
It's so exciting. I wonder if we could just go a couple clicks deeper on your film and the work that you're doing around women's health and menopause. From my perspective, I'm in my mid 40s.
Yeah.
I see so much more conversation happening, even just in the last couple of years around women's health, around menopause, misnomers or incomplete or inaccurate information that we've had about women's health. So I'm so excited that you are one of the voices on the forefront of this work. And I wonder if you could talk about, what is happening relative to women's health and this conversation that we're having, across the board, but also specific to aging and menopause.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up when you talk about your age. And I don't know if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, if we would both say like, oh, here's how old I am. I think that little by little, we're kind of shredding that stigma, which is great. But at this point, we're talking about, women working later and later. Over 44% of women are over the age of 45 in the workplace right now. So they are dealing with a lot of the issues that we're talking about, whether it's perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. And so that was the reason behind this. But the good news is that you're seeing conversations out there because those have just started to just escalate a little bit. We're seeing more headlines. We're seeing less, people not understanding, more people talking about it. I said menopause has become my new dinner party conversation. If you'd have told me years ago that's what I was going to be talking about, I would have been like, what are you? No, I'm talking about my shoes. But, it really is important because we need that quality of life. We have to understand what's going on with our bodies. And the worst thing that happens is if you go to an expert and you go to a doctor and you either get misinformation or no information, and you feel like you're alone or you feel like you're going crazy. And those two things are not okay. And so, I think it's really, really important that we talk about education, but we have to make sure that while we're educating, we're also teaching women, younger women especially, that stigma has to go away. And that's how we do it, by normalizing the conversation.
I love that. In your travels and in your learning in this area, what's maybe one thing or a couple of things that you find like, gosh, like women or society just like has the wrong information about this. Like this is just such a widely held myth. And yet when you look beyond that, you find that there's something that's really different at play. What's some of that misinformation that we have, or maybe a myth that we subscribe to?
Look, I have to ask you how long this podcast is. Because
Yes.
we'll need time. I think the biggest one, if we're just talking about societal and we're talking about, what goes on out there with ageism, I think that one of the biggest ones is that menopause equals old, or menopause equals invisible, or menopause equals like, not important anymore, not relevant because you're past your reproductive years. I think that that's the big one that I talk about. I'm not a doctor, but that is one that I could definitely address as a woman, and a woman that's 53 years old. The other big confusion is hormone therapy, whether or not it's safe, whether or not you can do it, why doctors don't always prescribe it. And the truth is, the simple answer is a lot of doctors haven't been educated about it in medical school. They just haven't. To doctor's admissions, I got 1 hour of study on it. I got none. I got, whatever I put into it is what I got out of it. And so I have to always shout out the doctors that are willing to have those conversations and discuss it and be open about the fact that they weren't taught so many things when they were in school, and are now sharing whatever they know with us. And there are so many that speak out, and it's really nice to have, and I'm so appreciative of it.
Mm, I love that. You know, one of the things that my girlfriends and I have talked about as we've gotten into our 40s and we've started having mammograms and we have that experience. And if anyone's listening who hasn't had a mammogram, men and women, right? There's a lot of like squishing of your breast between two plates, and it's very uncomfortable and even painful. And as we've gotten together after these experiences, we've said like, who invented this thing? And if men had to go through this, like there would be a completely different way of providing healthcare. And so, do you see in your work an opportunity to not only inform and educate, but also maybe a new opportunity or new interest in delivering healthcare for women that perhaps is like what is word more wholesome, less painful.
Right. Right. It's so funny. You're so right about that. I was talking to a friend of mine who actually had gone to her mammogram, and I had not I'd never discussed it before. I lost my mom to breast cancer at a very young age, and so my mammograms, when you lose a mother, your mammograms go back 10 years before the age she was diagnosed. So she was diagnosed at 44. So my mammogram started at 34 years old. And I guess I was so young because most people around me weren't going through them then. And as I never really talked about it. And I was talking to a friend and she said, what is that process? And I said, I know, but it's so necessary it's so important, early detection. She goes, I agree with you, but what is that test? And I said, you're right. I never really thought about it like that. But you are so correct. And so many women who have had that thought but kept it to themselves. I think I would like to see a different type of approach. And I think more than anything, I'd like to see women not struggling on their own to figure out what to do. So perhaps, your baseline for your mammogram, when you do baseline for your mammogram, you're told about some of these other things. So then you can figure out what you want to do. And then you figure out what other options are available to you. Because I think what happens a lot of times, and again, I'm not a doctor, but what I know as a patient and a woman, what happens in the healthcare system is we're not dealing with something until we're right up on it or it's a big problem. And I'd like to see that proactive approach so that doctors and patients can be partnered together and have a more proactive approach. So maybe lifestyle changes would work. Maybe there is a way to proactively figure out a different kind of strength training you're doing to help with your bones. Maybe there's a different way you're going to eat to help you out, with your body. And as we get older and we're worried about belly fat, so, I agree with you. There has to be that, but it has to come from a place of education and it has to come from a place of a partnership with whatever expert or medical care provider you're working with.
Mm, I love that. That's so beautiful. And this idea of being in partnership and also being proactive is such an exciting way that we can think about our health and our care in a really different and even innovative way.
Yeah, so much.
Just while we're here, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say you're so right about that. I mean, it has to be thought about. I feel like right now we're still plugging holes, trying to play catch up sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. So just while we're here on menopause, one more question here. In your travels, as you have interviewed women, as you've been an observation based on your own experience, um, do you have, obviously you're not a doctor, but do you have recommendations for how women today can maybe start thinking about this journey in their 40s and 50s in a different way, or maybe looking back to 10 years ago? Are there things that you would have done differently, sort of knowing what you know today about the menopause journey?
Yeah, I think I would have started thinking about it in my late 30s, actually, because I don't think it's too soon to do that. Because a lot of the changes that we talk to women about, and a lot of the things that we say we should be doing now are things that we definitely could have done back then. When I was in my mid 30s to late 30s, I went to the gym to burn off as many calories or whatever drink I had the night before, or whatever Mexican food I decided to eat at midnight. And I jumped on something, I did a bunch of cardio, and I moved on, and then that was kind of how I did my day. Didn't worry about what I ate, and and didn't really worry about too much. I think that um women that are in their 30s 20s now are asking the right questions. Like they're looking and saying, like, I want this quality of life that's not just long but a great quality of life. And so while I don't know that I would have wanted to think about menopause in my late 30s, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's another part of that transition that we're going through as women in our lives. So whether that means incorporating strength training into our workout, whether that means like looking at our diet a little bit differently, so it's not just about how many calories I'm bringing in, but what the foods are actually doing. And then taking that long-term approach to whatever I do is going to be something that's preventative for things like dementia, for cardiac care, for looking forward to osteoporosis and things that we're all going to have to deal with, no matter how cute and hot and sexy we are when we're young. Those are things that we do have to pay attention to when we're older. So I think instead of making this big change once we hit 40 or 50, we pay attention to that as we continue to age. I think I wish I had done.
Mm,
Wish I knew to do it.
yeah, yeah, same. I love everything you said. And I just started educating myself on this and talking to my friends. And a number of my friends said to me, when I was 43, 44, year and a half, 2 years ago, they were like, why are you thinking about this?
Right.
And I said, well, the average woman, you know, begins menopause at age 51, right? And menopause is when you've gone a full year without having a menstrual cycle. And so perimenopause starts
Yes.
7 years before that,
Yes.
And so I was like, in our mid 40s, we're actually, the average American woman is in that sort of perimenopause phase. And it just like blew their mind because to your point, they thought it was something that they didn't have to deal with or wasn't going to impact them for a much longer time horizon in the future.
Yeah, there's no question. You think, I mean, I even remember when I got it on my patient portal, I got this, I got this note from my doctor that said, in menopause, any questions, like in his signature. And I went, what? But I remember thinking, I'm 49. I'm too young for menopause. Like I was appalled by this. How dare he? And I didn't realize that, I was like, what? This must be the
Right.
wrong patient. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And I think I spent a lot of time in my 40s because I had never brought that up and nobody had talked to me about it. I think I spent a lot of time thinking, oh, it was stress. Oh, I ate too much. Oh, my workout wasn't as good. Oh, I didn't get enough sleep. And I didn't realize that there was something else there too that was causing the problem. It wasn't just me. And it would have been nice to know. So I'm glad you're having that conversation. I'll come join you and
Mm,
your friends whenever you want.
that sounds fantastic. We're all excited. We can't wait. So this is Flourish or Fold, stories of
Yes.
resilience. So obviously resilience is required for the
Yeah.
menopause journey. And I think one of the things that makes this show so powerful is that it's real talk. It's us having a conversation that's unplanned, unscripted, and also peeling back some of the layers and talking about some of the things that, may not come up, say, in common conversation. And so I wanted to ask you the challenge question, this idea about on our show, we have people like you, well-known people who get to share your lesser well-known story of resilience and what that looked like for you in your life, that experience. So, Tamsen, would you take us into a moment where, you faced a moment of challenge or change or complexity and how what that experience was and how that experience has, shaped and formed you into the person you are today?
Yeah, no, no question. I think there's been a lot of those moments, in all of our lives, right? And I think for me, I've had a couple of pivotal ones. And one obviously was the death of my mother. Like that was a moment that formed me forever. I think the other one, and this was many years later, but it was my divorce, and it was a really tough one. And I think I always center on that because that happened when I was in the height of perimenopause, and I was in the height of my career taking off, and I was on the outside, everything was great. On paper, everything was great. And at night, I would come home to an empty apartment because, my former husband had taken everything and two little dogs. And so that was what my life looked like, inside, outside. And I think that although I was the one that experienced it, I think that I have used those moments because I know there were many of them where I couldn't see what was going to happen on the other side. Like I thought, I can't see the other side. Like I can't, and I feel like an imposter every day when I go into work and I'm working this news job in New York City and I'm coming home to this like a mess of a personal life. And I think that taught me that I could handle anything that
Anything.
was thrown my way, and that, I mean, anything within reason, and I think it also taught me to rely on myself. And those are lessons that I don't know that, like, we say we want, but maybe we don't always wanna go through what it takes to get to that lesson, but I really, I really learned like what it meant to persevere. I learned what it meant to like pick yourself up and dust yourself off, because it wasn't just a divorce. There was a lot of emotional abuse that came with that. And so I really learned to depend on myself. And that was probably one of my flourish or fold moments. And there were a lot of feeling like I was going to fold many a days.
I don't know anyone who in the midst of those moments, is completely certain that they're not going to fold for
Yeah.
sure. And I love how you highlighted sort of this dichotomy that you were living, right? Sort of your um, day job and going into work and having this career that was really flourishing and um, you're moving toward, the height of your success and achievements and dreams and goals being realized. And yet, what a stark contrast to see that this relationship that, you had imagined would be, for the rest of your life, was no longer. And I'm curious to know for you, as you sort of we're in that moment of contrast. I think you brought up, this idea of like imposter syndrome, of feeling like things should look as good on the inside as they did on the outside. What was that process for you of, kind of bridging that gap over time? Or how have you come to maybe think about um, the dichotomies that exist in our lives at any given moment?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think social media does a lot in terms of that same type of dichotomy, right? Like everything looks great, and then you hear something about whoever it is, whether it's somebody you know or it's somebody you don't know that you're watching from afar. And so I think we see more and more examples of that. I think I bridge those together. I think it just took time. I don't know that. I did anything but just kind of build from here, because there was just a lot of different layers of it. There was a financial, there was the emotional, there was a business we had together, and then there was just perception, your own self-perception. And so I think that I did things in little pieces, like little bits, little moments of success to kind of build myself back to where I was, and then to understand what really mattered and what didn't. And it wasn't the, people that I didn't know that mattered. It was the ones that were close to me, and what I could do and how I could walk forward. I mean, I said to somebody recently who was going through a breakup, I said, I put one foot in front of the other by doing little silly things like being able to get up in the morning and being able to make coffee and go for a walk. Like it wasn't that I got up and said like, all right, think positive and it's going to all work. Like I wish that had worked, but that's not what it was. It was like these little normal everyday things that built on my success and built on my self-worth and gave me a little more confidence to be able to go forward and to eventually talk about it. I mean, it took years to talk about. That wasn't something that I told anybody except the people that were closest to me. And I guess the reason that I do talk about it now is because I think that we all, no matter who we are, go through a lot of the same things, right? It doesn't matter how great our life seems on the outside. We all go through the same things. And I think that if you can help one person realize that they're not the only one, then you've done your job here on earth. And that's what I think about it. It's what I think about when we, put a video out that's fun and we're, got somebody joking around, or I'm talking serious. I think if there's one thing we can do and one person that we can help with our story, then we've made a huge difference.
Hmm. I love that. I love that. My team and I are working on a compilation book right now called Triumphs of Transformation. And you can think about it as chicken soup for the soul,
Yeah.
meet stories of resilience. And as I've gone deep with our community of authors, one of the things that I've been so struck by is just the immense power of sharing our stories.
Oh yeah.
And I think, at a fundamental level, I always knew that to be true. And, I think we've known collectively that it's powerful to share our story. And yet, one of the things that I've been really struck by is that actually story is the greatest sort of form, or maybe one of the only forms of human alchemy. And what I mean by that is we take the darkest times in our lives and through our own healing and introspection to get to a point where we share that story with another person or with with a group of people. We transform those dark moments into a light that we shine on someone else's path. And to your point, by hearing your story or my story or someone else's story, we're going to help so many more people than just one person. But you take that darkness and it becomes a light, you know, where someone else is struggling and they say, if Tamsen could do it, if she could make it through that moment, then I can too. And for me, that is just so beautiful.
You put it so eloquently too, and I know you talk a lot about resilience, but you have to. I think sometimes we go through these things so we can see just how resilient we are, right? And you're right. If somebody else can have an example or a roadmap, and I also think that's kind of where the a lot of these conversations and these really moments happen. And I don't know that we realize them when we're in the moments, but I certainly realize that when it could be a week later, it could be two, it could be a year later. And I say like, oh my gosh, that person's story made such a huge difference to me, or what I read made such a huge difference to me. To kind of illuminate that path, like you said, I really like thinking about it like that. I'm
Yeah,
excited to
me
read that book.
too. Yeah, yay. We'll send you a copy when it's
Great,
out. It's coming
great.
out the end of June.
Oh,
Um,
congratulations. That's wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and that's been my experience too. Like sometimes I'll read a story and maybe it doesn't resonate with me at
Yeah.
the moment, but I remember it and it gets filed away for me. And then later on, something will happen and that story will come up for me again. And I'm like, oh, okay. And now I better understand the experience that that person was having. And it not only do I understand their experience to a greater degree, but recalling that story also helps me make sense out of, what's happening in my own life.
Yeah, there's no question about that at all. And it's interesting when those things pop up, right? Like you kind of never know. I think our brain is just fascinating, but the fact that we file something away until we need it and then we're like, "Oh, that's that's why I was keeping that stored there." So it's pretty amazing. And I do think that's the only way we learn. I mean, we could try to do 1,000 things and make 1,000 lists for wellness and self-help, but at the end of the day, I think that other people's stories are the things that really help resonate with us and show us it's okay.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. For all of you listening in to Flourish or Fold Stories of Resilience, I want to share with you an online course that we have on our website. We're going to go ahead and drop the website in our show notes, or you can go to www.resilience-leadership.com and check out our offerings. We've got an incredible course for you called Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People. So if you love what you're learning about in this podcast, if you love these conversations on resilience, if you love hearing about how you can more effectively face the inevitable moments of challenge, change, and complexity, or the 3 C's as I call them, in your life, then go ahead and check out our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People, because what you are going to find is a one-on-one tutorial with me around each of those 5 practices, as well as an introduction and a conclusion. We've got hours of content that is going to allow you to engage in direct coaching and learning with me on the 5 practices. Go ahead and check it out, and I hope you'll join us in our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People. Speaking of sharing stories, one of the sort of lights that you're shining into the world on your social media, on Instagram and other places is this idea of embracing change. And one of the areas where you've really pressed in is on the career switch, having the sort of courage and tenacity to step into making a big change in terms of career. And I wonder if you'd like to share a bit with your audience about how that's shown up for you in your own life and some of the lessons that you've gotten to learn on that journey.
Yeah, change is an interesting thing, right? Like we're always trying to figure out what's next in our life, and then we do it, and we're like, was this the right thing? Do we? Is it right that we did this change? I had been thinking about it for a while, and I never thought like I'm going to change careers and be a different person. I think I have been a journalist for a long, long time. I've loved being in New York, telling people stories. I've lived in a number of different cities doing that. And being part of communities has just always been really, really important to me because I think that that's when we enact change. People come to us, they tell us, something, they tell us something great, or they tell us something that they're struggling with. And we go out and try to get down to the bottom of it and help them with change and help give them a voice if they need help with that. And so I've done that for a very long time. And over the course of the past, I don't know, now we're talking like 4 years. Um, been thinking a lot about women's health, especially when I had an incident myself at the news studio as a result of menopause, but not knowing it at the time. And started to kind of dig deep into like, how come I don't know this? And then what? And then what? And then what happened? Why don't I know these answers? What I don't know these and no one knows these. And I just didn't understand it. And so I was doing that kind of on the side as, talking about it, talking to different panels, researching, doing interviews. And then it just became a thing where I said, you know what, this is where I can help. I can be of service with the storytelling ability that I have, with the interviewing ability that I have, and maybe I can do it to help more women. And that's where it came about. And it took me a long time. Like I made the decision, then I went back on my decision, then I made the decision again, and then I stuck to it even though I wasn't sure. And my poor husband was, every day I'm like, did I do the right thing? Do you think this is the right decision? But I knew in my core it was, and I knew in my core that I wouldn't be happy, fulfilled, um, if I didn't move forward and see what was next out there for me. And then when I did, I can't believe the world that's opened up, in terms of how I feel about how I tell my stories because I'm able to be more thoughtful in them. How I'm able to give back panels that I serve on, some of the content that we do on social is a result of the community that we have there, which is incredible women. Um, the generosity of like sharing information with each other is huge. And I love being part of that ecosystem. Like that's a big deal to me. And I really enjoy it. And I don't have children of my own, but I hope that, part of what I am helping to move forward as I get older is helping somebody younger who's coming up behind me that might not have a mom like I didn't, later in life or have questions or need some help or need a big sister. So that's how I got here. So
Mm.
that change happened about four months ago. And so it's been quite a shift, but an exciting one. And I feel like I haven't worked this hard in a long time. So it's interesting to see.
Wow. Yeah, I love hearing about this change, like so close to the time when it's happening.
Yeah,
Um,
close.
you know, so often it's, you know, years, in the future where we look back and we do a retrospective and I know you're going to see this time probably in a different way and maybe even a more nuanced way as it continues to progress. And I think it's also so helpful when we can to be able to speak to what's happening in the moment.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not possible because, I think for many people, myself included, sometimes I just haven't made sense of what is happening. I haven't learned the lessons yet. I don't have something to crystallize and share in the moment. And yet, when we do, I think it's so helpful to get to be able to connect, specifically with you around what it means to make this career shift and also to get to hear your perspective just 4 months in where you're really in it.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right about that. Because I've had people say, like, how did you do it? And I still don't know that I have that answer, but I do know that I'm definitely in the right place and I feel like I'm in the right place. And that's an interesting feeling to have because I think a lot of times we go through, and maybe that's just as I've gotten older, but I think I spent a long time in my life like, am I supposed to be here? Am I supposed to be there? I moved around a lot. I was in a lot of different cities, a lot of different jobs and positions. And so to be able to feel like I'm in the right place, not that I want to just not do anything else, but I feel like that gives you kind of a base or a foundation to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And there's something nice about that. There's something nice about that because
Mm,
I'm allowed to be present where I am, and I haven't been present for a long time.
mm, I love that. I'm curious for you, Tamsen. There's a lot of people out there who are like, should I be doing something else? You know, is this my life purpose?
Mm.
Is this what I'm meant to be doing? How do I know? All of those kinds of questions. Um, I think our audience and me too would be super interested to know what was it for you that sort of pushed you over the line to really allow yourself to make that big leap and to sort of follow your heart, if you will. I think there's a lot of people who kind of stay stuck in that uncertainty and that not knowing. So I'm curious for you, like, were there things that got you unstuck or really like allowed you to make that leap?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, it didn't happen overnight. There's no question about that. I think that some of the things that allowed me to get unstuck were to really focus this one question that I kept asking myself, like, what do you want? Like 4 words, like, what do you want? What do you want? And I think also realizing, and that's a hard question when you ask yourself that because it's so open-ended. It's easy to say, like, do you want to stay at home more? Do you want to do this more? Do you want to? It was like, what do you want? And that was a difficult one for me to answer for a long time. I also think that in the business of news, um, I was always worried for a very long time about aging out of my career. So I always had that in the back of my mind. I mean, ageism was something that that was definitely something that I was surrounded by for years. And so it was always in the back of my mind, somewhere back there. But ultimately, I got unstuck by literally taking time and sitting in it and sitting in and figuring out what it was I wanted, what I wanted my life to look like, who I wanted in my life on a day-to-day basis. It's so important who you're surrounding yourself with and the feedback that you're getting from people and what you're receiving. And then I wanted to figure out what my life looked like 10 years from now, like I didn't want to be, there and say, gosh, I wish I had, I wish I had. I interviewed Amy Ryan, the actress who is in a new show out, Sugar, and she was also in a Broadway show called The Doubt. And she was asked that's just recently, but she was asked at the last minute because somebody else had to leave the show to come in and learn this part in a week before opening night. And I said, how'd you make that decision? Like, I thought my decision was bold. That's a bold decision. And she said, I decided I didn't want to be answering the question like, why wouldn't you do it? Because that was a question I kept saying, like, why wouldn't you do it? She goes, and I knew I had to do it. And I think that's a really good question. Like, what do you want? And why wouldn't you go after what you want? And then there's going to be a lot of reasons. There might be a financial reason. There might be a time reason. There might be I don't even know where to begin reason. But then at least you can start peeling away at each one of those issues when you know what it is you want. So I was doing two things at the same time for a long time. I was working, doing this in women's health and advocacy and working my full-time job because I couldn't just, leave one to do the other. And until I could, that was when I finally left. But I think those two questions really got me unstuck and then got me in motion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And say those two questions for us again so we can crystallize them in
Yeah.
our mind.
It's what do you want and why wouldn't you do it?
What would you want?
Yeah.
Or
What
what
do
do
you
you
want?
want?
Yeah, I think when we ask that question, and it's just a simple one, but when we ask, what do you want? Like for me, my answer was, I wanted to have freedom and more time with my husband. I got married at 50 for a second time, and so that was important to me. And he lives back and forth between LA and New York, so we've been long distance for a long time. So that was one big thing. But the most important thing was I wanted to tell stories that I wanted to tell. I wanted to start taking the stories that I was telling about all of New York and really focus in on women's healthcare and advocacy and, a lack of resource and a lack of access and a lack of information and misinformation. So that was what I really wanted. And then the next one was, why wouldn't you do it? Well, the reason I wouldn't do it is because I was afraid of living something I was comfortable with. I was afraid of meeting new people. I was afraid nobody was going to want me. I was afraid people wouldn't believe me in a different role, and so I think that those were the two things I really had to answer for myself.
Hmm, I love that. I think one of the things that comes up for people, and I think in particular women, is we're not often asking ourselves, what do I want?
No,
You know,
never.
we're like, what does my partner want? What do my children need? What does my job want? What does my boss need me to do? What can I do for my parents? How can I help someone else? And so I think even that simple but powerful question of sitting down with ourselves and saying, what do I want?
Mhm.
Is a question that I would say the minority of women are asking ourselves, let alone taking the time to answer.
When, when I brought that up for the first time with myself, I'm like, this question's awful. Like I ignored it for a while because I didn't have an answer. I could tell you what somebody else wanted. I could tell you what I need to do that day. I could tell you what other people wanted me to do. I couldn't tell you what I wanted. I had nowhere to draw from with that answer. I knew there, a few things that I would be interested in doing, but I never sat down or quieted myself enough or paused enough to figure out what I wanted. And you're right. I mean, I think that's also why at this time in life, when we're talking about midlife for women, all of a sudden, women, and we've seen more and more of these incredible stories, but all of a sudden they, come out with this brand new product or a new career or turn their lives around or like, I look and I go, these stories are amazing. How did they do that? But I wonder, had we asked ourselves, what do you want? What do I want? Much younger, maybe we would, be able to do that too. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that that's what really worked for me. And I would like more women to take time to do that because we spend our lives, handling, fixing, solving everything for everybody else, or trying to please everybody else. And that's how we end up sometimes in the positions that we're in. And we don't realize it until we've been there. And then it just feels very difficult to get out of it.
Yeah. I'm curious, was there a prohibition for you around, gosh, I mean, so many things, right? Like selfishness, like feeling selfish to ask yourself what you wanted. Or, I think for some people, like worthiness comes up, like who am I to get to do what I want? Do I deserve it? Which I think also falls, there's like enoughness, like am I at a place in life where I even get to ask this question? Have I done enough? Am I enough? So sort of overlaying that question, um, were there things that you ran into around like selfishness or worthiness or enoughness that you also got to filter through in order to get to some answers?
Yeah, I mean, I still do. Every once in a while I go, am I allowed to feel happy right now? Like, do I deserve to feel like this? What did I do to deserve to feel, so and boy, I don't like those questions, but I have them because I feel like if I don't have them, there's some kind of fear, right? That you're not being gracious enough, or you're not being thankful enough, or, you're not working hard enough. So I do think we do have a lot of enoughs in our lives. And I don't know when the enough ends. And I definitely have it. There's no question. I don't think I've solved that yet. I'd love to, but then some days I'm glad I haven't, because I feel like that makes me stay very appreciative. Like I'm very appreciative. However, I would like every once in a while to go, okay, yeah, it's enough. You're 53 years old. You're going to be 54 this year. Yeah, you did something to deserve this. And so, I don't know, maybe we need to hear that from each other a little bit more. Maybe some of these friendships that we have, we need to remember, when we tell somebody we're there for them, right? We need to say, hey, I just want you to know you're enough, instead of
Mm,
we're here for you. We're here from you is fine, but like, hey, you're enough. It's okay. You
mm,
deserve this. Maybe that's what we have to do to each other. I feel like, men slap each other on the back, and they're like, hey, buddy, you're doing great. And I don't know that we do that as women. And maybe we need to. Maybe enough is that word.
I love that. I love that. Well, we're coming to the close of our time together. And one of the things that you and I talked about before we recorded, in sort of the virtual green room, if you will,
Yes.
uh, is this idea of sort of writing letters to our younger self, or maybe things that we would tell our younger self. And so I'm curious for you, Tamsen, if you could go back to any point in your life, any time period, you can give us an age. If you could go back and meet with a younger version of yourself at any age, what would that age be? What would be sort of happening in that moment? And what would you tell her?
Oh gosh. You get good questions. I think I don't know why, but like the age 34 kind of came up for me. When you asked that, I talk about a lot of different like times when I talk on social media. I say your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, but for me in particular, I think 34 comes up because it's this really interesting time. You're no longer in your 20s, right? You're supposed to sort of have everything figured out, but we don't always. And I was in a place then where I'm like, um, was just thinking like I needed to get I was like I need to get married. I'm like getting old. I was thinking about all these things, and I think that if I look back now, I would say, hey, you don't have a timeline. No one's got a timeline on you. This is all on your time, and it's going to be okay. You're going to figure it all out. It's going to be okay. You're going to be enough, right? Now, what do you really want? That's what I would have said to her. I would have said, what do you really want? And, I would have said like, find some of those close friends and stick with them. Don't worry about what everybody else says. Don't try to be the most popular girl in the room. Surround yourself with the right kind of people, because you definitely know in your gut who they are. And, trust your gut. You don't have to do polls of everybody else out there to see, what everyone else thinks before you make a decision for yourself.
Mm, love that. I love that. It sounds like you would have just started that "what do I want"
I
conversation
probably would
earlier.
have. I probably would have. I should have started at like 20.
Ah, amazing. So great. Well, I know that this conversation and what you have shared with all of us is just going to uplift so many people's lives, that they're going to feel deeply inspired by the wisdom and the knowledge that you've shared, by the example that you've set in your own life. And they're going to want to know more about,
Oh,
what you're up to as a journalist, as a women's health advocate, as a content creator. So where can people, we'll put things in the show notes too, but where can people connect with you? Where would you like people to come check in and learn more about your work?
sure, absolutely. I mean, my website is tamsenfadal.com, but you can find me anywhere on social at Tamsen Fadal. And I will keep you up to date. I have a newsletter there, and I just try to pop on there live as much as I can and say hello and check in with everybody. So any of those places are perfect.
Well, Tamsen Fadal, thank you so much for coming on the Flourish or Fold podcast today. What a delight and an honor to have you as a guest.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Hey there, Flourish or Fold listeners. I'm still thinking about the part of my conversation with Tamsen where she talked about that divergence between what it looked like, on the outside, who she was when she was going through her divorce, and then what was really happening for her on the inside. And I think about the 5 practices of highly resilient people, about vulnerability, and how I've defined vulnerability, not as discrediting or self-deprecating, but as allowing our inside self, our thoughts, feelings, and experience to match most effectively, most closely the outside self that we're sharing with the world. And I think so often when we go through challenge, it's so isolating. And we worry that people are going to think there's something wrong with us. They're going to judge us. And how isolating it is to keep up that facade, to keep maintaining an outward appearance while what's happening behind the scenes can be quite divergent, quite different from what other people are seeing. And so I love that Tamsen gave us voice to that experience for her when she was going through her divorce, a low time in her personal relationships, and yet also being at a high point in her career, and how she was navigating living through both a sort of summit in her career and a valley of her personal life. Tamsen was an incredible guest. I hope you loved her interview as much as I did. And I'm going to be on the lookout for her M Factor film about shredding the silence around menopause that'll debut this year, October 18th, World Menopause Day, on PBS. Until next time, thank you so much for being a Flourish or Fold listener. Please do download this episode so we know you heard it. Provide a 5-star rating, and I'd love to hear your reviews and thoughts. We read all of them, and I'm deeply grateful for how this show is impacting so many people's lives. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, this is Dr. Taryn Marie. For all of you listening in to Flourish or Fold Stories of Resilience, I want to share with you an online course that we have on our website. We're going to go ahead and drop the website in our show notes, or you can go to www.resilience-leadership.com and check out our offerings. We've got an incredible course for you called Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People. So if you love what you're learning about in this podcast, if you love these conversations on resilience, if you love hearing about how you can more effectively face the inevitable moments of challenge, change, and complexity, or the 3 C's as I call them, in your life, then go ahead and check out our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People, because what you are going to find is a one-on-one tutorial with me around each of those 5 practices, as well as an introduction and a conclusion. We've got hours of content that is going to allow you to engage in direct coaching and learning with me on the 5 practices. Go ahead and check it out, and I hope you'll join us in our online course, Flourish, the 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People.